So chapter 8 is wakefulness and sleep. So when it comes to your sleep and waking cycles, early psychologists believed that those cycles of wakefulness and sleep were dependent on external stimuli that existed in your environment. Richer in 1922 proposed that the body generates its own cycles of activity and inactivity related to sleep and wakefulness. So, research has shown us that animals are able to generate these sort of circadian rhythms, which are internal mechanisms that help operate their annual and yearly wakefulness and sleep cycles. And we know that all animals produce what are called circadian rhythms, including humans, which are internal mechanisms that operate on a 24-hour cycle. So if you take a look here at this chart, it tells you sort of what the waking period looks like and the sleep period at the start of each day when there was an experiment conducted. So the whole purpose of the circadian rhythm is to keep everybody's internal workings in tune with the outside world. The circadian clock helps generate a rhythm that's longer than 24 hours and has no external cues set to it. So when people reset their circadian rhythm, it is sometimes necessary. There are certain stimuli that can help reset your circadian rhythm, such as sunlight, exercise, meals, the temperature, and so on. You can also have things like depression and irritability and impaired job performance, which can also disrupt a person's circadian rhythm because it can cause them to lose sleep. Jet lag is a condition that occurs when there's a disruption in a person's circadian rhythm because they cross a time zone. So this normally happens when you fly overseas or go to a different country. You experience jet lag. People who work on shifts, and they sometimes work at night and they sometimes work in the morning, can also have disruptions in their circadian rhythm because their sleep is going to depend on when they actually go to sleep. And working at night sometimes doesn't change your circadian rhythm. So oftentimes people who work that shift will continue to want to work that shift at night because they feel like that's kind of where their body is set. People are able to adjust to that night work if they sleep in a very dark room during the day and work under very bright lights because they can try to trick their body into what time of day it is. Some people consider themselves morning people and other people consider themselves night or evening people. Their cycles can differ related to wakefulness and alertness. Sometimes the change is a function of age. Young children tend to be more morning people. Adolescents oftentimes tend to be more night people. And as an adult, it generally depends on genetics, which you prefer morning or evening. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is the part of the brain that controls a person's circadian rhythm, their ability to sleep, and their temperature. Anytime there's been damage to this area, then there's less consistent body rhythms, and the person is no longer synchronized to environmental patterns like light and dark. So you can see here's where the suprachiasmatic nucleus is located. And if that's damaged, that can lead to disruption of the circadian rhythm. So those single cells in the SCN are going to help regulate the tissue that responds to a person's circadian rhythms. When it comes to biochemistry in your circadian rhythm, there are two types of genes that are responsible for it. There's the period and timeless. Period genes produce proteins, and timeless genes also produce proteins. And those help increase the activity of those neurons that are going to help the suprachiasmatic nucleus function the way it should. Melatonin can also be used to help regulate the pineal gland, which is a part of your endocrine system that's responsible for sleepiness. So the pineal gland naturally secretes melatonin, which helps people become sleepy. And sometimes people can take melatonin and try to trick or push their pineal gland into action. So melatonin secretion usually begins about 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. So as you're starting to wind down for the night. Sleep is when your brain actively produces and is able to decrease its level of activity in response to stimuli. So it's a time of your brain resting. Your brain needs the rest. So your brain is going to produce the possibility of sleep. So it's important to remember that sleep differs from being in a coma or being brain dead or in a vegetative state, because we know that those are kind of medically related situations. A coma is an extended period of unconsciousness characterized by low brain activity. The person might show little responses. Sometimes comas are medically induced. When a person is in a vegetative state, they can alternate between periods of sleep and moderate arousal, but they may not have awareness of their surroundings because their body has decreased in response to the environment. When a person is a minimally conscious state, it's one state higher than a vegetative state, and the person may have brief periods of action and limited speech comprehension. And then if someone is brain dead, there's no sign of brain activity, and there won't be any response to a stimulus. When you're asleep, your brain activity continues. The way we measure various stages of sleep is using an EEG. By using an EEG, we can see what brain activity is going on. A polysonogram is in a combination of an EEG and the eye movement records. So from various sleep studies, research has shown us that stage 1 and relaxation, what those stages of sleep look like. So here's a relaxed state, a normal state. And if you notice, a stage 1 stage of sleep doesn't look that much different. Stage 1 sleep is when sleep has just begun and brain activity begins to decline, but it's still very active. Stage 2 sleep is characterized by sleep spindles and K complexes. Sleep spindles are the kind of really compact waves that burst in half seconds, and the K complexes are the sharp waves of functioning. So in stage 2, that's where those K complexes and sleep spindles start. That's as you start to get into a deeper stage of sleep. Stage 3 and 4, which we now can actually combine together as one stage. You can see here, this is when your brain waves continue to slow, and there's lots of neural activity here, lots of K complexes, sleep spindles. Paradoxical or REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep. And this is the time when a person is in a deep sleep. They may be dreaming. That is why it's called rapid eye movement sleep, because there's the thought that a person is watching their dreams take place. This is when your muscles of the body are more relaxed. So all of the other stages, stage 1, 2, 3, which also is combined with 4, are known as non-REM sleep. And the dream sleep stage is known as REM sleep. When people fall asleep, they go through stages 1, 2, 3, and 4 in sequential order, and then they can drop into REM sleep after a period of time. So this cycle of being in stages 1, 2, 3, and 4 can last approximately 90 minutes. Stages 3 and 4 are predominant during early parts of the night, and REM is much later at night when the person is in a much deeper sleep. You can, though, dream in stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that REM is a much deeper state of sleep with probably the most memorable dreams. Various brain mechanisms are also associated with our ability to stay awake and be aroused. The reticular formation is a part of the midbrain that extends from the medulla to the forebrain and is responsible for arousal. Then you also have the pontomesencephalon, which is a part of the reticular formation, which can also contribute to your ability to be aroused. So it's important to know that it's not just one area of the brain, multiple areas are involved. Those areas can produce excitatory effects in the cortex. The locus coeruleus is the small structure in the pons whose axons are going to also release norepinephrine and arouse various areas of the cortex. This area is dormant while a person is asleep, so it's not working because you don't want to be aroused and put in a waking state. The hypothalamus produces activity related to sleepiness as well because it releases histamines, and antihistamines also produce sleepiness. One other neurotransmitter that's released by the hypothalamus is orexin, which is a peptide neurotransmitter which people need to stay awake rather than to wake up. So it's released by the basal forebrain to stimulate neurons to get you up and moving in the mornings. GABA and acetylcholine also play a role in wakefulness. The cells of the basal forebrain release that inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA and makes it easier for you to wake up. During sleep, GABA is inhibited. The inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA can also be important for decreasing, sort of having a person relax and reduce their temperature rate. There are some disorders that can happen as a result of sleeping. One of them is sleepwalking, which is when a person is awake and they get up out of bed. So one part of their brain is awake and other parts are asleep, and that's how sleepwalking occurs. Lucid dreaming is dreaming but being aware of being asleep and being aware that you're dreaming. It's kind of like makes your dream feel real, like you feel like you're going through the moment. The pons are remaining active during REM sleep, while other brain areas are awake, and that causes the inability to move. And it's important that a person is not able to move when they're dreaming so that they don't go and act out their dreams. So here are a list of those brain structures we just talked about and how they're related to arousal and sleep. So you just want to kind of be aware of what role these neurotransmitters play in your ability to wake up and go to sleep. We know that during REM sleep, your brain is active. Remember, your brain is dreaming. REM sleep can also be associated with PGO waves, which are electrical potentials. REM sleep can also be associated with pons that send messages to the spinal cord so that the body doesn't go and move, so that you can stay relaxed and in bed and not try to act out your dreams. Serotonin and acetylcholine help regulate your REM sleep and keep you in a sleep state. Insomnia is a sleep disorder associated with inadequate sleep. People can have insomnia related to noise around them, stress, pain, their diet. It could be because of a medication. It could be because of a disorder they're diagnosed with. Many people will often take sleeping pills or alcohol to try to shift their circadian rhythm, but that can also result in insomnia. It's a widespread problem in America. Sleep apnea is a sleep disorder as well, which is characterized by the inability to breathe properly while sleeping. People who suffer from sleep apnea can be asleep during the day. They can have impaired attention, depression, heart problems. It could be caused by obesity, hormones, genetics, but then also brain mechanisms that control your breathing, and it can lead to cognitive impairment. So most people, like the guy you see in the screen, have to participate in a sleep study in order to be diagnosed with sleep apnea, and they usually have to wear a CPAP machine in order to treat it. Sleep apnea can be a deadly disease or a deadly disorder because people who have the disorder stop breathing at various times throughout the night, but by wearing a CPAP machine, they're able to continuously breathe. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder characterized by frequent periods of sleepiness at random times of the day. This person can have sleep attacks, so they don't know when they will have an episode of narcolepsy. They can also have sleep paralysis, which is the inability to move while falling asleep or waking up. They can also have hallucinations and dreamlike experiences. We believe that narcolepsy has a genetic component, although no gene has been identified for it. And the primary treatment for it is stimulant drugs like Ritalin, and because it can increase wakefulness and enhance dopamine and neuroepinephrine activity. But people who are diagnosed with narcolepsy have to be very careful because they don't know when a sleep attack will happen, and therefore driving a car and doing certain jobs are difficult. Periodic limb movement disorder is a repeated involuntary movement of the legs and sometimes the arms while sleeping. This usually occurs in non-REM sleep, and the person might kick every 20 to 30 seconds. REM behavior disorder has to do with lots of movements that occur during REM sleep, like sort of looking like restlessness. It's kind of associated with a person's desire to act out their dreams. And research suggests that inadequate GABA and other inhibitory neurons that are not slowing the person down enough might be responsible. Night terrors and sleepwalking. Night terrors are interesting because they're experiences of intense anxiety, which causes a person to scream in terror. It usually happens during non-REM sleep. However, you should never wake a person who's having a night terror or even a sleepwalker or sleep talker, because they really aren't cognitively aware of the fact that they're having a night terror and probably won't remember it in the morning. Both of these disorders are primarily found in children. Sleepwalking also tends to run in families and mostly occurs in stages 3 and 4 of sleep. It is not dangerous to wake a sleepwalker, but waking them won't cause anything to change. A condition similar to sleepwalking, sexsomnia, is engaging in sexual behavior while asleep, and that can pose a threat to romances and marriages. So what is our whole purpose of sleeping? Sleeping helps you rest your muscles, decrease your metabolism, perform cellular maintenance in your neurons, reorganize your synapses, and strengthen your memories. Sleep can also help you conserve energy and regulate your body temperature. We all have to be able to sort of revamp ourselves. Hibernation involves a decrease in body temperature to only slightly above that in the environment. It tends to retard the aging process, and it's a period of relative invulnerability to infection and trauma. So we know that people don't really hibernate, but bears do. And bear hibernation is not as extreme as that of smaller hibernation, such as bats and squirrels, but they all hibernate. And they come out of hibernation for a few hours every few days. During this period of time, neurons and cell bodies shrink and their dendrites lose a fourth of their branches. So it's also a time in revamping. If you take a look at the chart, this kind of gives us some species differences in sleep between various animals and whether they are a predator or a prey. And you can see how many hours each species spends sleeping. So for the human, it's about 8 hours. And then if you take a look at a horse, it's only, right just under 3 hours, whereas for a bat, it's 19 hours. Sleep can also play a part in your ability to remember things. It can enhance learning. If there's ever anything on your mind throughout your day, you kind of can process it at night. There are increased brain activities that occur in areas of the brain associated with learning a new task while you're asleep. Humans spend about 1/3 of their life asleep, about 1/5 in REM. Species vary in the amount of time they spend in REM sleep depending on the animal. What are the functions of REM sleep? It is for your brain to discard and get rid of things that might be useless, and then also for learned motor skills to be consolidated. In 1998, Maurice said that REM sleep is designed to shake the eyeballs back and forth and provide sufficient oxygen to the corneas. From a biological perspective, when it comes to dreaming is complicated by the fact that subjects cannot often accurately remember what they had a dream about. So the activation synthesis hypothesis proposes a theory, and so does the neurocognitive hypothesis. The activation synthesis hypothesis says that dreaming begins with spontaneous activity in the pons, and that activates the cortex. When you're dreaming, you can't move. This is also a common dream. There's normal sensory information that's integrated into the mind. The neurocognitive hypothesis places less emphasis on the pons and more emphasis on the activation of the brain just getting information from your sense organs. Arousal not being an action of the primary motor cortex, and the motor neurons to the spinal cord being suppressed. So according to the neurocognitive hypothesis, activity in the prefrontal cortex is suppressed, which impairs working memory during dreaming. You can have internal or external stimulation, which activates different parts of your brain during the neurocognitive hypothesis. Basically, this hypothesis is saying that various parts of your brain need to be activated, and that's why dreaming occurs. That is everything you need to know about this chapter.